Michael Theodore Mouse, known professionally as Mickey Mouse, has been a professional steamboat pilot, a hot dog vendor, an amateur aviator, a ghost hunter, a tailor. But you know what he's never been? Walt's favorite character. You heard me right. You see, like the animators, Walt had come to realize that the more popular Mickey was, the more sanitized his character was forced to become. Whereas the Mickey of the original shorts was kind of a jerk and even anti-Semitic, as the character became the figurehead for the entire company, it was realized that parents would expect Mickey's character to be immaculate. Mickey is comparable to Superman in this sense, in that both started as genuine characters that were eventually turned into something more akin to symbols, sometimes literally. This has had the effect of neutering Mickey, turning him into a character many would find stale, boring, and anachronistic. Except Runaway Brain, but that's banned. Luckily, though, about 6 years after Mickey's creation, another character was born. Donald Fauntleroy Duck. While most Disney characters are created in the same way as Mickey, a lone artist making a sketch, Donald's creation was unique. Clarence Charles Nash was born December 7, 1904, in Watauga, Oklahoma. According to Nash, as a boy he would entertain his friends with funny voices, including an early version of the Donald voice.
Because I would say Mary had a little lamb with this voice, but it was a goat that started me doing it. Well, I imitated him, and he'd go, you know.
Yeah.
Well, one day I thought I could say words with it. And my friends laughed, and even at the age of 13, I had a feeling I had something that just might pay off.
Nash would become an impressionist on radio in the late 1920s and would eventually go on to work for the Adder Milk Company as a kind of publicity spokesman. Led by a team of miniature horses, Whistling Clarence, the Adder Birdman, would tour the streets handing out treats to children and doing impressions. In one version of events, it was on one of these tours that Nash personally dropped off his own audition tape for Disney Studios. Another version of the story says that Walt Disney heard Nash on the radio and asked him to audition. Nash did an impression of a baby goat reciting Mary Had a Little Lamb, but when Walt heard it, he leapt to his feet and said, "Stop! That's our talking duck!" Evidently, they had been looking for a duck character for some time, and in fact, the name Donald Duck had originally been used in a Mickey Mouse comic strip in 1931, but for a completely different character. In my opinion, while they have the same name, this is not the same Donald Duck that we're talking about. Finally, though, after all their searching, they had found the voice. Early sketches of Donald are based on Nash's voice and performance. Animator Albert Herter designs Donald, including the sailor suit and hat with which he would become synonymous. Herter's job at Disney was literally to draw things as he pleased that would inspire the other artists and writers in their work. Herter would eventually create material for Snow White and Pinocchio. So now Disney had his duck. He just needed a short to put him in. In 1874, author Mary Mapes Dodge adapted a fable her mother used to tell her for the St. Nicholas magazine. It was the tale of a hard-working hen who asks other animals to help her make bread from wheat, but faced with their laziness, is forced to do all the work herself, eventually getting her revenge on the wannabe freeloaders. This tale was perfect for Disney, and perfect for Donald. Besides designing Donald, Albert Herter would design all of the characters in this Disney adaptation, including the originally intended star of the short, Peter Pig. The short was animated by Art Babbitt, Dick Humer, Clyde Geronimi, Louis Schmidt, and Frenchie de Tremodin, with assistance from a group of junior animators headed by Ben Sharpstein. It was directed by Wilfred Jackson. Besides being Donald's first appearance, this short is notable for being the origin of Donald Duck in comics. From September 16th to December 16th, 1934, the Silly Symphonies Sunday comic strip ran a 3-month-long adaptation of The Wise Little Hen. The story was adapted by Ted Osborne and Al Taliaferro, both of whom would go on to write and draw the popular Donald Duck comic strip, where Donald's nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, would first be introduced. Interpretations of the short have ranged from it being an analogy for Roosevelt's New Deal agricultural programs, to being about conservative self-reliance in the Reagan era, and even a socialist pro-labor allegory. All of that can be ignored, however, as the story at its heart is just about the value of hard work. Thankfully, you can find a beautifully restored version of The Wise Little Hen on Disney+. Walt immediately saw the potential for Donald, and it said that it was his idea to put the duck in the next Mickey Mouse short, Orphan's Benefit. Directed by Burt Gillette and animated by Johnny Cannon, Les Clark, Norm Ferguson, Dick Williams, and Dick Lundy. Ward Kimball worked on the short as an in-betweener. While Wise Little Hen showed off Donald's voice and physicality, his character there is basically just a lazy freeloader, something necessitated by the story. In Orphan's Benefit, we get the first glimpse at the personality of the modern Donald. He likes to show off, he never gives up, and he gets pissed off easily. As an homage to Nash's original audition, and probably just because they knew he could do it, Donald attempts to recite Mary Had a Little Lamb and, unlike Nash, fails miserably, being taunted by the mischievous orphans. We also get a glimpse at a vaguely adversarial relationship between Mickey and Donald, although it's mostly just on Donald's part. In a fit of anger, Donald takes an aggressive stance that would become famous. Dubbed by animator Dick Lundy as the fighting pose, Lundy would say of the pose, quote, "For this I had him lean forward, chin out, arm straight out and fisted. The other arm with fist was swaying back and forth. His one foot was straight out, heel on floor, the other foot under him as he hopped up and down quacking. The action was fairly violent for the time." Donald would end up striking this pose virtually every time he got mad, and Lundy would go down as one of the most important contributors to Donald's character, one of the legendary Duckmen. Original music was composed by Frank Churchill. The short includes the voice of Walt Disney as Mickey, Clarence Nash as Donald, and Florence Gill as Clara Cluck. According to Disney historian Marsha Blitz, it can be seen that the framework of Orphan's Benefit was traditionally slapstick. Audiences laughed at Donald's physical mishaps much as they laughed at Chaplin's or Keaton's. But in this instance, there was the added dimension of Donald's abrasive personality. Surely nothing like it had ever been seen in a cartoon. Animator Ward Kimball called the short a turning point for the studio, where the character animation would be more reflective of their inner thoughts and personality. Said Ward, "The reaction that came pouring into the studio from the country was tremendous. The kids in the theater loved or hated or booed Donald Duck. Unfortunately, the short is not on Disney+, possibly due to the dangerous behavior of the orphans." Also, I want to point out that these orphans look a lot like Mickey. In fact, they look exactly like Mickey. And that's just about all I'm going to say about that. 1934's The Dog Napper showcases the inherently comedic nature of Donald's wobbly physique, revealing his strengths when compared with Mickey. To quote Walt Disney himself, "He's got a big mouth, a big belligerent eye, a twistable neck, and a substantial backside that's highly flexible. The duck comes near being the animator's ideal subject. He's got plasticity plus." The film was directed by David Hand and features the voices of Pinto Colvig as Pete, Melvin J. Gibby as Fifi, and Clarence Nash as both Mickey and Donald. This was the first and only time that Mickey was voiced by Nash. Walt was in Europe at the time and was unavailable to record Mickey's lines, so Nash filled in.
How difficult is Mickey to do?
Well, very easy. It's falsetto, you know. Hi, everybody!
Unfortunately, this short is not on Disney+, possibly for violence, but the short is currently one of the 6 shorts that regularly play at the mainstream cinema in Disneyland, California. If you're in the park and looking for a good place to sit and relax, this place is perfect. 1935's The Band Concert presents a much sillier Donald than audiences would come to know, a trickster who deliberately interferes with Mickey's concert, although he only wants to join in. Directed by Wilfred Jackson, once again Donald is the highlight of the cartoon as he faces off against a surprisingly aggressive Mickey. The Band Concert has become one of the most highly acclaimed Disney shorts. Esquire magazine cultural critic Gilbert Seldes wrote that none of the dozens of works produced in America at the same time in all the other arts can stand comparison with this one. That might be the best review I've ever read. The Italian conductor Arturo Toscanini was such a fan of the Band Concert that he saw it 6 times in the theater and later invited Walt Disney to his home in Italy. Luckily, the Band Concert is available on Disney+. Mickey's Service Station, 1935, is notable for being the very first short that brought together Goofy, Donald, and Mickey. The triumvirate would star in many shorts after this, and to this day they are the Kirk, Spock, and McCoy of Disney. Directed by Ben Sharpstein, Mickey's Service Station was the director's first short not part of the Silly Symphonies series. It stars the voices of Walt Disney, Clarence Nash, Pinto Colvig, and Billy Bletcher. Mickey's Service Station is not on Disney+, probably because Pete fires a pistol. 1936 brought Donald and Pluto. The film was directed by Ben Sharpstein. The cartoon also introduced Fred Spencer's new design for Donald Duck, which included a slimmer body, shorter neck, rounder feet, and a shorter bill. This one is not on Disney+, probably because the folks at Disney are afraid kids might imitate Pluto eating a magnet. In 1941, Donald had his first appearance in a feature-length film, in The Reluctant Dragon, although it was more of an appearance for Clarence Nash, even if Donald did get a few lines. In 1940, a newly formed U.S. government agency called the Coordinator of Inter-American Affairs, or CIAA, approached Disney about helping to combat the growing influence of the Axis powers in Latin America. This would be part of the CIAA's Good Neighbor program, which was intended to foster friendly relations between the U.S. and South and Central Americas, which filmmaker Orson Welles also took part in. In 1941, Walt took off for a goodwill tour of South America, along with a personally chosen group of Disney Studios artists. Huge crowds came out to greet them wherever they went. At the same time, the artists were taking in as much of the music, beautiful visuals, and culture of the countries as they could. The group included Frank Thomas, Ted Sears, Herb Ryman, Jack Cutting, and Bill Cottrell. Charles Woolcott would handle the music. Also present was Mary Blair, whose art would later be used as the basis for the design of the It's a Small World ride in Disneyland. Though the film started as a series of shorts, it was later agreed by all concerned that the material would work better as an anthology film. The stories included Lake Titicaca, Pedro, El Guacho Goofy, and Aquarela do Brazil. Donald would be included in the first and last segments. Walt said of the film, "While half this world is being forced to shout Heil Hitler, our answer is to say, Saludos amigos." Going along with this theme, Donald's part in the film is that of a bumbling American tourist. Instead of mocking the locals, it's Donald that gets the short end of the stick, representing the stereotype of an annoying American. Saludos Amigos was a great success, being nominated for 3 Academy Awards, including Best Musical Score, Best Original Song for its opening theme, and Best Sound Recording. Film historian Charles Richard Jr. has commented that Saludos Amigos did more to cement a community of interest between peoples of the Americas in a few months than the State Department had in 50 years. After the success of Saludos Amigos, it was agreed that the next CIAA Disney project would be an anthology film right from the start of production, and it would obviously star Donald Duck, who had achieved worldwide celebrity status since the release of the first film. Because the sequel would be made with the intention of being an anthology from the beginning, the connective tissue could be laid more naturally, and the difference is obvious when one watches both films. This time, Donald would star in a wraparound story, framing the segments and giving the film a more cohesive feel. As Aquarela do Brazil was universally recognized as the highlight of Saludos, it was decided that Jose Carioca, who had made his debut in that segment, would appear again in the sequel, along with a new character, a Mexican rooster named Panchito. Released as The Three Caballeros, the film's critical response was not as positive as the first one, and some critics felt the film was a case of style over substance, but since then it has become a favorite of Disney and Donald fans. Luckily, both these films are available on Disney+, complete with apologies from the company for ever having made them. Even by 1938, most polls showed that Donald was more popular than Mickey. Walt had even reportedly called Donald his favorite character numerous times. But starting in 1942, Donald would star in a series of World War II propaganda films and educational shorts that would significantly boost the character's profile and cement his place as the most popular Disney character. Starting in 1942's Donald Gets Drafted, Donald entered military service and began training for combat, a process carried on throughout his shorts until he faced off against the Japanese in 1944's Commando Duck. Donald was chosen for these films because he was already a huge star at the time, and because he was just more relatable than Mickey. Donald's uncertainty, fear, anger at authority, but also real patriotism and willingness to sacrifice were all something that real American soldiers could see in themselves. In fact, Donald was so popular, he appeared on hundreds of World War II military patches. There's a great video on Phil Edwards' channel about this, which I highly recommend. Donald was also on pretty much every kind of aircraft during the war, including the B-25 Ruptured Duck that bombed Tokyo in the 1942 Doolittle raid. Imagine seeing this overhead right before you get bombed. According to official Department of Defense documents, Donald was officially drafted into the Army in 1941 and was served honorable discharge papers on May 19, 1984. Donald even appeared in his World War II uniform during the Armed Forces Day Parade in Torrance, California. In addition to the Army shorts, Donald also appeared in the Academy Award-winning short Der Führer's Face in 1941. In the short, Donald has a nightmare about living in early 1940s Germany instead of America. The poster alone, which depicts Donald throwing a tomato in Adolf Hitler's face, could be used as its own propaganda poster, and the film's main theme became a hit on radio. Shamefully, the World War II Donald shorts are not on Disney+, although in the case of Der Führer's Face and Commando Duck, this is somewhat understandable, given that both contain racist caricatures of Japanese people. Still, like many, I think Warner Brothers' approach with the Looney Tunes DVDs was correct, acknowledging the disgusting nature of the material while preferring not to ignore it. You could argue that the disclaimers on Disney Plus perform this function, but I see them more as the company covering its own ass than a genuine attempt at placing art in its proper context. Along with the World War II films, 1942 would mark another hugely important landmark for Donald. Back in 1939, the very first Mickey Mouse feature film was in production, called Morgan's Ghost. The story would be about Mickey, Goofy, and Donald meeting a peg-legged parrot named Yellowbeak, who tells them he has the treasure map to the gold of Henry Morgan. The only problem is that Peg-Leg Pete is hunting the pirate and is actually eavesdropping on the entire conversation. After Pete captures Yellowbeak and sends them out on a tiny raft, the trio end up on the right island by chance and manage to find the treasure chests, only to find that they do not contain gold, but ghosts. The ghosts of Captain Morgan and two of his crew members. Captain Morgan agrees to help Mickey and his friends get Yellowbeak back and says he will help them find the treasure, but he will not directly tell them the location of the gold because dead men tell no tales. This appears to be the earliest use of this expression within the Disney lore before being used in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland. The film was ultimately shelved because of the financial strain the Second World War had on the company. In 1942, Oscar Levick, editor of Dell Comics, was allowed to look through the files of unused Disney shorts and found over 800 concepts for Morgan's Ghost. The entire story had been worked out, meaning that it could easily be adapted for a comic book, and Levick thought Donald Duck was perfect for it. The script would be written by Bob Karp, who had written gags for the Donald Duck comic strip. The illustrations would be done by Jack Hanna, prolific director of Donald Shorts, and Carl Barks. It would be the first Donald Duck comic Barks would work on, and the start of an amazing career, writing and illustrating comics for Donald, and eventually Scrooge McDuck, whom he also created. Barks and Hanna divided the drawing work. Barks was responsible for pages 1, 2, 5, and 12 through 40, while Hanna would do the remainder. Barks would generally draw the exterior scenes, and Hanna would do the interiors. The comic was released in October 1942 in 4-color issue 9. It was the first Donald Duck adventure comic released in America, and it was a huge success. Japanese animator and cartoonist Osamu Tezuka, referred to as the godfather of manga, cited Donald Finds Pirate Gold as an influence on his New Treasure Island. Carl Barks would go on to write and draw a regular Donald Duck comic book. The plots ranged from zany misunderstandings and potentially dangerous situations played for comedy to full-on adventure stories. I could talk about Barks for hours, which I intend to do in the future, but for now, I'll just talk about one story of his, Lost in the Andes. The story starts with Donald working as the 4th assistant janitor at the Museum of Natural Science. While dusting off a square stone, Donald accidentally drops it, breaking it open and revealing it to be an aged square egg. The scientific world is startled by this find, but the records behind it were destroyed in the Chicago fire. One scientist says that the limestones in the shells indicates that they come from high up in the Andes. Egg dealers love this idea because they think that the eggs could be stored more easily than round ones. Chicken dealers love the idea because they think that square chickens could be stored more easily. Before long, an expedition to Peru is launched, and Donald is promoted to 3rd assistant, as he orders around Huey, Dewey, and Louie, the 4th, 5th, and 6th assistants. At first, when Donald asks the locals about the square eggs, they don't know what he's talking about, But then he comes upon a village filled with the things, before the kids realize that the locals are just responding to Donald's demand for the eggs by pouring cement into square molds. Finally, they meet a blind old man who has seen the square eggs long ago, and tells them to search inside the great fog-covered areas where few have tread. Donald and his nephews become lost in the fog, but eventually slide down a slope and discover an ancient city hidden within the mists. Here they discover that the locals actually speak English, but in a thick southern accent, as they were taught to speak it by a professor from Birmingham, Alabama. The professor said that the city was just plain awful, so that's the name that the locals have given it. Plain awful. This is a fun, ridiculous story that combines the adventure of exploring foreign locales with a satirical edge that Barks loved, and could be seen in many of the Donald shorts he worked on before leaving animation for the world of comics. If you're looking to start reading the Barks stories, I think this is a great place to begin from. Not everybody loved the Barks stories, though. In 1971, Ariel Dorfman and Armand Matillard published their book-length essay titled Para leer El Pato Donald, or, in English, How to Read Donald Duck. In the essay, the authors argued that the Donald comics are intentional propaganda designed to further Western capitalism and colonialism. The argument may be considered somewhat convoluted, even going so far as to assert that the lack of direct familial lines between characters, such as the fact that everyone is either a cousin, nephew, or aunt of one another, as somehow being indicative of a society wherein only wealth can denote one's place in the hierarchy. I will do a complete synopsis and review of this book in the future, so stay tuned. But for now, I think it's interesting that the authors seem to think that Walt Disney himself, or at least the Disney Corporation, forced ideology onto the comic creators, something that there is absolutely no evidence for that I'm aware of. More importantly, having read a lot of these stories, I would say that they are overtly cynical and misanthropic, which I'm not sure that the authors even noticed. Capitalism, colonialism, respect for elders, respect for hard work, everything gets satirized in Barks stories. Everything's a contradiction, everything's absurd, and the only lesson is that being lucky is the best you can hope for. On June 9th, 2024, Donald Duck turns 90 years old. He has had many jobs in his time, perhaps finding it difficult to maintain employment. He was a war hero, even if he wasn't always brave. He was quick to anger, but also quick to joy. Donald is popular exactly because Donald is us. Walt Disney once said, "I think we have a good thing with Donald. He won't stand for any nonsense, and he's not afraid of anything." A 1939 interstudio memo said this about Donald: "His most likable trait is determination. The duck never compromises. Regardless of the odds against him, he comes back again and again into the fray. When attacking a problem, he may be either cocky, cautious, or cunning, or all three by turns. He seldom flies into a rage at his first rebuffs. Usually those defeats serve to bring out his cleverness. He doesn't stay angry for long periods. Even in his wildest rages, he can be completely and instantly mollified with a little gratification." As Donald's birthday approaches, if you want to pay him a little respect, I suggest you visit California Adventure or one of the other fine parks where you can see Mickey's PhilharMagic, a charming little 3D animation combined with special effects that pays homage to early shorts like the band concert, and even uses archival clips to include the voice of Clarence Nash as Donald. Oh yeah, and there's an animatronic of Donald's butt, too. It's pretty kick-ass. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was really made more out of, love than anything else. I don't expect it to do well, particularly because of how Disney kind of treats stuff. They might block it, they might do something. I don't care. I don't care if they do copyright on me. I just did this for fun. I hope you enjoy it. I plan to do more stuff too. So if you liked it, if you want to see more stuff like this, including more, I'm going to do reviews of every Donald short, every comic that I liked of Donald, and I'm going to talk about some other stuff as well, including Gamera, and Star Trek. I don't know. I'll whatever I want to talk about. But I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please like and subscribe. And that's me. That's Park Narks. Woo!